The sun was just beginning to rise over the quiet suburban neighborhood when Officer Daniel Harper received the call. A resident had reported seeing a man in military fatigues near a restricted military installation. It wasn't unusual for people to wander close to the area, but recent security concerns meant that every report needed attention. Daniel grabbed his gear and called Zeus, his loyal K-9 partner, into the patrol car. The dog's sharp instincts and training made him an invaluable asset on duty. Little did Daniel know, this routine call would change his life, and countless others, forever. As they approached the location, Daniel scanned the streets. The morning air was crisp, and the only sounds were birds chirping and distant traffic. Then he spotted someone walking along the fence line of the installation. The figure wore camouflage pants and carried a small backpack. From a distance, it looked like they were inspecting the perimeter. Daniel parked the car and stepped out cautiously, calling out, "Sir, can you stop right there? I need to talk to you." The man turned slowly. He was older, with salt and pepper hair and a posture that suggested years of discipline. Despite his calm demeanor, something about him seemed off. Daniel couldn't quite put his finger on it, but he signaled for Zeus to stay alert. The man raised his hand slightly, showing no immediate threat, but then he reached toward his backpack. In an instant, Zeus lunged forward, reacting to what he perceived as danger. Daniel shouted, trying to regain control, but it was too late. Zeus pounced on the man, biting down hard. Panic surged through Daniel as he rushed to pull the dog away, but the damage was done. Blood soaked through the man's shirt as he collapsed to the ground. Daniel radioed for medical assistance while attempting first aid, but the injuries were severe. By the time paramedics arrived, the man was unconscious. Hours later, Daniel learned the devastating truth. The victim was none other than retired U.S. Army General Marcus Holloway, a highly respected war hero and advocate for equality within the armed forces. News of the incident spread rapidly, igniting outrage across the country. Protesters gathered outside police headquarters, demanding accountability. Social media erupted with debates about racial bias in law enforcement, given that Daniel was white and General Holloway was black. For Daniel, the weight of guilt pressed heavily on his chest. How could this have happened? Was it negligence on his part, or simply a tragic misunderstanding? General Holloway's death sent shockwaves not only through the community, but also within his own family. His daughter, Lieutenant Eva Holloway, stationed overseas at the time, returned home to bury her father. She was devastated by the loss, but determined to uncover the truth behind his final moments. As she sifted through her father's belongings, she discovered notes referencing ongoing disputes with powerful figures in Washington. Could his death have been more than just a terrible accident? For Daniel, each day became harder to face. Colleagues whispered behind his back, accusing him of incompetence. Activists painted him as another example of systemic failure. Yet amidst the chaos, one question lingered in his mind. Why had General Holloway been near the installation in the first place? And what secrets might lie hidden beneath the surface of this tragedy? In the days following the incident, Officer Daniel Harper found himself trapped in a storm of guilt and confusion. The image of General Marcus Holloway collapsing to the ground replayed in his mind like a broken record. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't escape it. He kept asking himself the same questions over and over. Could he have stopped Zeus sooner? Had he misread the situation entirely? Each unanswered question weighed heavier than the last, making it hard for him to focus on anything else. At the precinct, things weren't much better. His fellow officers avoided eye contact with him during roll calls, and whispers filled the room whenever he walked by. Some blamed him for losing control of his K-9 partner, while others quietly admitted they might have reacted the same way under pressure. But none of their opinions mattered to Daniel. He couldn't forgive himself. Every time he looked at Zeus, who wagged his tail innocently as if unaware of what he'd done, Daniel felt a fresh wave of shame wash over him. For the first time in his career, he questioned whether he was cut out for this line of work. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Ava Holloway arrived back in the United States after receiving the devastating news about her father. Stepping off the plane, she felt numb, her military training doing little to prepare her for the emotional toll of burying a parent. As she drove to her childhood home, memories flooded back, her father teaching her how to ride a bike, cheering her on at track meets, and later supporting her decision to join the Army despite its challenges. Now, those cherished moments felt tainted by anger. How could someone as kind and honorable as her father meet such a senseless end? Ava's grief quickly turned into determination. Sorting through her father's belongings, she discovered files and handwritten notes detailing his recent activities. They revealed that General Holloway had been investigating discrepancies within certain defense contracts, allegations of corruption involving high-ranking officials. One name stood out repeatedly: Thomas Whitaker, a retired FBI deputy director known for his controversial views on law enforcement reform. Though Ava didn't know why her father had singled out Whitaker, she sensed there was more to his death than met the eye. Back at the police station, Daniel struggled to find solace. His captain reassigned him to desk duty pending an internal investigation, leaving him with too much time to think. At night, he lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering how his life had unraveled so quickly. Protesters outside the precinct chanted slogans calling for justice, their voices echoing through his dreams. He wanted to explain himself, to tell them he hadn't meant for any of this to happen, but he knew words wouldn't fix what had been broken. One evening, as Daniel sat alone in his apartment, he received a call from his mother. Her voice trembled as she asked how he was holding up. When he hesitated, unsure of what to say, she sighed deeply. "There's something I need to tell you," she began. Before she could continue, Daniel interrupted, saying he wasn't ready to talk right now. Little did he know, her words would change everything he thought he knew about his family, and possibly even shed light on the tragedy that haunted him. As the days dragged on, both Daniel and Ava wrestled with their emotions. For Daniel, guilt consumed him, while for Ava, a burning desire for answers fueled her every move. Neither realized yet that their paths were destined to cross, or that unraveling the truth would force them to confront uncomfortable realities about themselves and the world around them. Special Agent Rachel Monroe was no stranger to high-pressure cases, but this one felt different. Assigned by the Department of Defense to investigate the death of General Marcus Holloway, she knew the stakes were higher than ever. The public outcry had reached a fever pitch, and everyone, from politicians to activists, was watching closely. For Rachel, it wasn't just about solving the case, it was personal. She had known General Holloway for years, having worked alongside him during joint military and federal operations. His calm demeanor and unwavering integrity left a lasting impression on her. Now, as she stared at his file on her desk, she promised herself that she wouldn't rest until justice was served. Rachel's first step was to interview Officer Daniel Harper. Sitting across from him in a small interrogation room, she studied his face carefully. His eyes were bloodshot, and dark circles hung beneath them like storm clouds. He looked defeated, as if the weight of the world rested on his shoulders. As he recounted the events leading up to the incident, Rachel listened intently, jotting down notes. At first glance, his story seemed straightforward. A routine patrol turned deadly when his K-9 partner acted aggressively. But something didn't add up. Why had General Holloway been near the restricted installation? And why did Daniel seem so hesitant when describing the moments before Zeus attacked? "Tell me again," Rachel said gently, leaning forward. "What exactly did you see when you approached the general?" Daniel hesitated, rubbing his temples. He reached for his bag. I thought maybe he was going for a weapon." Rachel nodded but pressed further. "Did he say anything? Make any sudden movements?" "He didn't say much," Daniel replied quietly. "Just raised his hands when I told him to stop. Then he started reaching into his backpack." Rachel circled back to this detail multiple times, sensing there was more to it. Daniel's answers grew increasingly shaky, and she couldn't shake the feeling that he was holding something back. Whether it was fear, guilt, or confusion, she wasn't sure. But she made a mental note to dig deeper. As part of her investigation, Rachel reviewed surveillance footage from nearby cameras, examined forensic reports, and interviewed witnesses who lived close to the scene. One neighbor mentioned seeing General Holloway walking along the fence line earlier that morning, seemingly lost in thought. Another described hearing raised voices shortly before the attack. Each piece of information added layers to the puzzle, but none provided clarity about why the general had been there in the first place. While piecing together the timeline of events, Rachel stumbled upon something unexpected during a background check on Daniel. His personnel file listed next to nothing about his family history, just a vague note stating that his father's identity was unknown. Curious, Rachel dug deeper. What she uncovered shocked her. Daniel's biological father was none other than Thomas Whitaker, a retired FBI deputy director infamous for his hardline stances on policing reform and controversial ties to powerful lobbyists. The revelation hit Rachel like a punch to the gut. Could this connection mean something? Or was it merely a coincidence? Either way, it complicated matters significantly. If Whitaker had any involvement in whatever General Holloway had been investigating, then Daniel's role in the tragedy might not be as simple as it appeared. Determined to get to the bottom of things, Rachel decided to bring Daniel in for another round of questioning. And this time, she planned to confront him directly about his father. For Daniel, life was already unraveling, but he had no idea that the truth about his family was about to come crashing down around him. And for Rachel, the case was becoming far more intricate and dangerous than she could have imagined. The trial against Thomas Whitaker and his co-conspirators became a turning point not just for Daniel Harper and Ava Holloway, but for the entire nation. Every day in court felt like a battle, with lawyers presenting arguments that tugged at the moral fabric of society. Evidence piled up, emails detailing illegal transactions, whistleblower testimonies exposing rigged bids, and even recordings of Whitaker pressuring officials to silence dissenters. The courtroom buzzed with tension as journalists scribbled notes, cameras flashed outside, and protesters gathered daily, chanting slogans demanding accountability. For Ava, sitting through the proceedings was emotionally draining. Hearing her father's name mentioned repeatedly, often in connection with his efforts to expose corruption, brought tears to her eyes. But she refused to let grief weaken her resolve. Instead, she channeled it into strength, speaking passionately during victim impact statements about the kind of man General Marcus Holloway had been, a leader who believed in fairness, justice, and doing what was right, no matter the cost. Her words resonated deeply with those present, humanizing the tragedy and reminding everyone why this fight mattered. Daniel, too, faced his own challenges. Testifying against his father was one of the hardest things he'd ever done. As he took the stand, all eyes were on him, some filled with curiosity, others with judgment. His voice trembled at first as he recounted how he had uncovered Whitaker's involvement. But as he spoke, his tone grew steadier. He didn't shy away from admitting his own failures or expressing regret over the role he played in General Holloway's death. By the end of his testimony, there was a palpable shift in the room. People saw not just an officer caught in a terrible situation, but a man willing to confront his past and take responsibility for his actions. When the verdict finally came, it sent shockwaves across the country. Thomas Whitaker avoided prison due to his plea deal, but was stripped of his pension, barred from holding any public office, and placed under house arrest. Several of his associates weren't so lucky. They received lengthy sentences for their roles in the conspiracy. While some criticized the leniency shown to Whitaker, others recognized the significance of dismantling a network of corruption that had operated unchecked for years. With the trial behind them, Daniel and Ava found themselves at a crossroads. Both had sacrificed so much. Daniel lost his career and relationship with his father, while Ava buried the person she loved most in the world. Yet, amidst the pain, they discovered a shared purpose, ensuring that tragedies like this never happened again. Together, they decided to channel their experiences into something positive by founding an organization dedicated to bridging gaps between law enforcement and marginalized communities. Their nonprofit, named Pathways to Justice, aimed to foster dialogue, promote transparency, and advocate for meaningful reforms within policing and government institutions. They traveled across the country, sharing their story with audiences ranging from community groups to congressional panels. At each stop, they emphasized the importance of accountability, empathy, and collaboration. Their message struck a chord, inspiring many to join the movement for change. As months passed, Daniel began to rebuild his life. Though he still carried the weight of guilt, he found solace in knowing he had done everything possible to honor General Holloway's legacy. He adopted Zeus into a new role as a therapy dog, visiting schools and veterans centers to help others heal. For Ava, continuing her father's work gave her a renewed sense of purpose. She threw herself into advocacy, determined to ensure that future generations wouldn't have to endure the injustices her family had faced. Together, they proved that even in the darkest moments, light could emerge if people were brave enough to seek it. And though scars remained, they served as reminders of battles fought and lessons learned. Through their resilience, Daniel and Ava inspired countless others to believe that real change was possible, one step at a time. Thomas Whitaker was not a man accustomed to losing control. For decades, he had operated in the shadows of power, pulling strings and making deals that shaped policies without ever leaving fingerprints behind. But now, as Rachel Monroe's investigation gained momentum, cracks began to show in his carefully constructed facade. The leaks to the media were bad enough. Headlines screamed about corruption, illegal arms deals, and silenced whistleblowers. But what truly unnerved him was the realization that his own son was working against him. When Whitaker learned of Daniel's involvement, his reaction was swift and brutal. He summoned Daniel to a private meeting at an upscale downtown office, far from prying eyes. The room was cold, sterile, and devoid of warmth, much like their relationship. As Daniel entered, Whitaker stood by the window, his back turned, exuding an air of quiet menace. "So," Whitaker began, his voice low but laced with venom, "you've decided to side with them. With people who know nothing about loyalty or sacrifice." Daniel clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay calm. "Loyalty doesn't mean covering up crimes, Dad. What you've done, it's wrong. And I can't stand by it while innocent lives are destroyed." Whitaker turned slowly, his piercing gaze locking onto Daniel's. "Innocent? That general wasn't innocent. He was poking his nose where it didn't belong, stirring up trouble for no good reason. You think this is about justice. This is about survival. About protecting what matters." "To hell with your version of survival," Daniel shot back, his voice shaking with anger. "You're using fear and lies to keep yourself on top. Well, I'm done being part of it." The tension between them crackled like electricity. Whitaker studied his son for a long moment before speaking again, his tone softer but no less dangerous. "If you continue down this path, Daniel, there will be consequences. People will come after you. Your career, your reputation, they'll all be gone. And once they're gone, you won't get them back. I already lost those things the day Zeus killed General Holloway," Daniel replied bitterly. "At least now I have a chance to make things right." Frustrated, Whitaker tried one last tactic: bribery. He offered Daniel money, promises of protection, even opportunities to rebuild his life elsewhere. But Daniel refused every offer, standing firm in his decision to testify against his father if necessary. Defeated, Whitaker dismissed him with a curt wave of his hand, muttering under his breath about betrayal and weakness. Meanwhile, Ava and Rachel worked tirelessly to compile their case, knowing time was running out. Whitaker's influence extended far and wide, and they could feel the pressure mounting. Anonymous threats arrived in the form of late-night calls and cryptic messages left on their phones. Yet neither woman backed down. If anything, the intimidation only strengthened their resolve. Finally, the day came when they presented their findings to federal prosecutors. Armed with irrefutable evidence, including documents, testimonies, and financial records, they painted a damning picture of Whittaker's role in orchestrating a cover-up that led to General Holloway's death. Faced with overwhelming proof, Whittaker struck a plea deal to avoid prison time, agreeing to cooperate in exchange for reduced charges. For Daniel, watching his father admit guilt in court was both heartbreaking and liberating. It marked the end of a chapter he never wanted to write, but couldn't escape. As Whittaker walked away from the courtroom, his head bowed in shame, Daniel felt a strange sense of closure, not forgiveness, but acceptance. The trial dominated headlines nationwide, shining a light on systemic corruption and sparking conversations about reform. For Ava, seeing justice served brought some measure of peace, though her father's absence still left a void nothing could fill. Together, she and Daniel vowed to use their experiences to create change, refusing to let the sacrifices of those who came before them go unnoticed. Though scars remained, they found solace in knowing they had fought for something greater than themselves, and that their actions might pave the way for a brighter future. When Rachel confronted Daniel about his father, the room seemed to shrink. She slid a printed document across the table toward him, a copy of an old FBI personnel file with Thomas Whittaker's name highlighted in bold. Daniel stared at it, his face pale and his hands trembling slightly. For a moment, he said nothing, his mind racing as if trying to process the impossible. Is this some kind of joke? Daniel finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. Rachel shook her head, her expression calm but firm. I wish it were. Your biological father is Thomas Whittaker. Did you really not know? Daniel leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. He looked like a man who had just been told the ground beneath him was made of glass. No, he said after a long pause. My mom never talked about him. All I knew was that he left before I was born. She always said it didn't matter who he was. It wouldn't change anything. Rachel nodded sympathetically but pressed on. Do you think she might have kept this from you for a reason? Maybe to protect you. Daniel's jaw tightened. Protect me from what? From knowing my own dad. This doesn't make sense. Why would she hide something like this? Rachel hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Thomas Whittaker isn't exactly a small name. His career has been complicated. He's been involved in some high-profile cases, and not everyone agrees with his methods. If your mom thought it would bring trouble into your life, maybe she felt silence was better. The weight of Rachel's words settled over Daniel like a heavy blanket. Growing up, he'd often wondered about his father, imagining all sorts of scenarios, some hopeful, others painful. But he'd never expected this. Thomas Whittaker wasn't just anyone. He was a polarizing figure whose name sparked debates about ethics, power, and accountability. And now, Daniel had to grapple with the fact that half of his DNA came from a man he didn't even know. As Daniel struggled to process the revelation, Ava Holloway was making discoveries of her own. Sorting through her father's belongings, she found a box tucked away in the attic. Inside were letters, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes detailing investigations into alleged corruption within the military-industrial complex. One letter stood out, a brief note addressed to General Holloway from someone named T.W. The message was cryptic but alarming. Drop it, Marcus. You're playing with fire. Ava's heart raced as she read the note again and again. Who was T.W.? The initials matched Thomas Whittaker's name, but she couldn't be sure without more evidence. Still, the timing seemed too coincidental. Her father had been vocal about exposing wrongdoing in government contracts, often criticizing those who prioritized profit over patriotism. Could Whittaker have been involved somehow? Was he connected to the forces that may have wanted her father silenced? Back at the precinct, Daniel wrestled with conflicting emotions. On one hand, he felt betrayed by his mother for keeping such a monumental secret. On the other, he couldn't ignore the growing suspicion that his father's shadow might stretch further than he realized. What if Whittaker's controversial reputation had indirectly influenced the events leading to General Holloway's death? The thought made Daniel sick to his stomach. That night, unable to sleep, Daniel decided to visit his mother. It was late, but he needed answers. When she opened the door, her face fell at the sight of him. Before she could speak, Daniel held up the document Rachel had shown him. "Mom, why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice cracking under the weight of emotion. She sighed deeply, gesturing for him to come inside. Sitting at the kitchen table, she poured 2 cups of tea and began to explain. "I wanted to shield you from his world, Danny. Your father, he's not a bad man, but he's tangled up in things most people can't understand. Politics, power plays, favors owed. I didn't want that life for you. I wanted you to choose your own path." Her words offered little comfort. Daniel realized that his family's past wasn't as simple as he'd once believed, and neither was the tragedy that had shattered his present. As he left his mother's house, he knew one thing for certain. Uncovering the truth would mean confronting not only the system he served, but also the legacy of the man who helped shape it. Months after the trial, Daniel Harper and Ava Holloway stood side by side on a stage in a small community center. The room was packed with people, young and old, activists, law enforcement officers, students, and families. A banner behind them read "Pathways to Justice, Building Bridges for a Better Tomorrow." It had been nearly a year since General Marcus Holloway's death, and while the wound still lingered, Ava felt her father's spirit guiding every step of their journey. Daniel began the presentation, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I'm not here to tell you I have all the answers," he admitted. "What I do know is that silence doesn't fix anything. Neither does fear. My K-9 partner took a life that day, a good man, a hero, and I'll carry that weight forever. But if we can learn from it, if we can turn pain into action, then maybe something meaningful can come out of this tragedy." Ava nodded, stepping forward to speak next. "My dad believed in fairness. He believed in standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. When he died, I thought the world lost a piece of hope. But working with Daniel has shown me that hope isn't gone. It's just waiting for us to pick it up again. That's why we started this organization. To honor him, yes, but also to make sure no one else has to lose someone they love because of systems that fail us." Their message resonated deeply with the audience. Afterward, people lined up to ask questions, share stories, or simply thank them for giving voice to those who often felt unheard. One woman approached Ava, tears streaming down her face. "Your father saved my brother's life once," she said softly. "He never gave up on him when others did. Thank you for keeping his memory alive." Moments like these fueled their determination. They traveled tirelessly, visiting cities large and small, speaking at schools, police academies, and town halls. Their nonprofit grew rapidly, attracting volunteers and supporters eager to contribute to the cause. Workshops were held to train officers in de-escalation techniques, cultural sensitivity, and community engagement. Counseling programs were launched to support victims of police violence and their families. Slowly but surely, change began to take root. For Daniel, the transformation was profound. Resigning from the force hadn't been easy, but finding a new purpose through Pathways to Justice gave him a sense of fulfillment he'd never expected. Zeus became a symbol of redemption, proving that even those associated with tragedy could play a role in healing. Children loved meeting the gentle dog, and veterans found comfort in his presence during therapy sessions. Watching Zeus connect with others reminded Daniel that second chances weren't just possible. They were essential. Ava, too, found peace in unexpected ways. Though nothing could replace her father, she realized that continuing his work kept him close. She carried his values in everything she did, from mentoring young activists to collaborating with lawmakers on policy reforms. Her dedication earned her respect within both military and civilian circles, cementing her reputation as a leader unafraid to challenge the status quo. As time went on, their partnership evolved beyond shared grief into genuine friendship. They leaned on each other during tough days, celebrated victories big and small, and reminded each other why they started this journey in the first place. Together, they proved that two people from vastly different worlds could unite under a common goal and create something extraordinary. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset over a quiet park where they'd hosted a recent event, Ava turned to Daniel with a smile. "Do you think my dad would be proud?" she asked. Daniel didn't hesitate. "Absolutely. He'd probably say we're just getting started." They laughed, knowing there was still much work to be done. But for the first time in a long time, they felt hopeful. Hopeful that justice wasn't just an ideal. It was something they could build together, brick by brick. And though scars remained, they wore them proudly, reminders of battles fought and lessons learned. In the end, Daniel and Ava showed the world that even in the face of unimaginable loss, resilience and unity could pave the way for a brighter future. Their story wasn't just about tragedy, it was about triumph, about choosing to rise, to fight, and to believe that tomorrow could always be better than today. Rachel's investigation took a dramatic turn when she connected the dots between Thomas Whittaker and General Holloway's recent activities. Digging deeper into classified records, she uncovered evidence suggesting that Whittaker had been quietly working with powerful defense contractors to suppress whistleblowers exposing illegal arms deals. These deals involved inflated prices, defective equipment sold to the military, and kickbacks funneled to politicians. General Holloway, it seemed, had stumbled upon these operations during his own inquiries and was preparing to blow the lid off. The more Rachel pieced together, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about corruption. It was about silencing anyone who threatened the system. And if Whittaker was involved, as the clues suggested, then Daniel Harper might have unwittingly played a role in something far bigger than he could have imagined. Meanwhile, Ava Holloway continued her search for answers. The letter signed T2U haunted her, fueling her determination to uncover the truth. She reached out to retired military colleagues and investigative journalists, sharing fragments of her father's notes. Slowly, a pattern emerged. Several whistleblowers who had tried to expose similar schemes had either disappeared, faced smear campaigns, or died under mysterious circumstances. General Holloway's name appeared repeatedly in their files, linking him to efforts to shine a light on the dark corners of the defense industry. Ava's resolve hardened. If her father had been silenced because of what he knew, she owed it to him, and to others like him, to ensure his voice wasn't buried forever. But going up against figures like Thomas Whittaker wouldn't be easy. She needed allies, people who understood the stakes and were willing to fight alongside her. That's when she decided to approach Rachel Monroe. Their meeting happened in a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. Ava laid out everything she'd found. The letters, the patterns, the names, and watched Rachel's expression shift from curiosity to alarm. For Rachel, hearing Ava's discoveries confirmed her worst fears. This case was about much more than a single tragic incident. It was about exposing a web of deceit that stretched across multiple levels of government and corporate power. "We need to work together," Ava said firmly, her eyes locking onto Rachel's. "You have access to resources I don't, and I have information you need. My father gave his life for this fight. We can't let it end here." Rachel hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Agreed. But we're stepping into dangerous territory. People like Whittaker don't play fair." As they strategized, Daniel wrestled with his conscience. Learning that his father might be tied to the very forces responsible for General Holloway's death left him feeling torn. He wanted to believe Thomas Whittaker wasn't capable of such cruelty, but the mounting evidence painted an ugly picture. One evening, after days of internal struggle, Daniel made a decision. He contacted Rachel, asking for a private meeting. When they met, Daniel handed over documents his mother had reluctantly shared, old letters and memos referencing Whittaker's involvement in controversial projects. "I don't know how deep this goes," Daniel admitted, his voice heavy with guilt. "But if my father is part of this, I want to help stop it." Rachel studied him carefully, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. She knew trusting him carried risks, but they needed all the help they could get. "This won't be easy," she warned. "If Whitaker finds out you're working against him, he'll come after you." Daniel nodded grimly. "I've already lost everything else. What do I have to lose now?" With Daniel on board, the trio began piecing together a damning case. They gathered testimonies from former whistleblowers, analyzed financial transactions tied to shady contracts, and even uncovered emails implicating Whitaker in attempts to discredit General Holloway. Each new discovery brought them closer to the truth, but also closer to danger. Thomas Whitaker soon caught wind of the investigation. Furious, he used his connections to pressure Rachel's superiors into shutting it down. Threats were made, warnings issued, and bureaucratic roadblocks thrown up at every turn. But Rachel refused to back down. Instead, she leaked key documents to trusted journalists, ensuring the story would reach the public no matter what. For Daniel, betraying his father's legacy felt like ripping open an old wound. Yet in doing so, he found a glimmer of redemption. By standing with Iva and Rachel, he realized he could still choose to do the right thing, even if it meant sacrificing the last ties to his family. Together, they prepared to face whatever came next, united by a shared mission to bring justice to those who had been wronged, and to honor the memory of General Marcus Holloway.